everybody, welcome to Fantasy TV. Today I'm going to talk about comic books and humidity and the best investment and collection strategies for those who live in humid environments. Now, first of all, a little bit about comics and humidity. Humidity, especially high humidity, that's constant, will have a marked and perhaps devastating effect on your comic books. The pages will first yellow, then they will brown, and eventually you might get something called foxing, which are these brown, like pock marks that are from live parasites that are actually eating the mold that's developed in your comic book. Now, I think they recommend the best humidity for storage is like a maximum of 42%. You may be able to get away with 50%. But once you get into the tropics, where there's a lot of avid collectors now, Florida, Texas, the whole southern Bible Belt region, Asia, China, Taiwan, parts of Japan, humidity becomes a problem. You're talking 80% perhaps or higher, even Honolulu, between 70 and 80% during the summer. So these places, you're going to have to develop a strategy if you're a serious collector investing a lot of money. Now, of course, I'm going to break down your best strategies for how you can preserve your comics. I'm a good authority on this because I've been a fairly serious collector for 20 years. About half that time I was in an ideal Southern California environment that's dry and fairly cool, and then I moved to the tropics. So I've learned how to troubleshoot the effects of humidity. Now I'll start with 3 tiers of strategies, going from the most high-end to the most affordable. Okay, so we'll start with the high-end. If you're investing tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in your collection, you're going to have to do this if you're in a high humidity environment. You're going to have to get a room to put your comic books that has about 4 qualities. No sunlight, low humidity, the right temperature, and let me start with those 3 and I'll get to the 4th. So you want to store your comic books out of the sun. You're going to have to get AC running constantly, probably about 60 degrees and no higher. You're going to need a dehumidifier. So those are the 3 things. And the 4th thing is you don't want to store your comics right near the air conditioner or the dehumidifier, because the moisture that's being pushed out from there can get stuck in your comics even if they're encapsulated and make a problem of their own. So store your comics away from those devices and out of the sun. Secondly, you have to run these devices full time, especially during the summer, because if you turn them off and on, the fluctuation of humidity and temperature will have a damaging effect on your comics just as rapidly, probably, if you didn't have them at all. If things cool down significantly during the winter, you can adjust your devices accordingly or maybe turn them off depending on the region where you live. So that's the highest tier. Now, what I mean by highest is you're going to be paying maybe a few $100s extra a month in electricity charges and maintenance of these devices. However, if you're a high-value, high-end collector, it's pretty much essential unless you want to move to another state that's drier. Now, there's 2 more strategies you can do that aren't as expensive if you're still an avid collector. One of them is you can buy silver foil or aluminum foil comics because the covers are not actually paper. They have a real silver veneer. And they're not going to be as susceptible at all to the effects of humidity and temperature. They still are, but it's at a much, much slower rate. And especially if they're encapsulated like CGC, they're already going to be quite protected as long as you keep them out of the sun. The third strategy is to pay attention to the type of comics you're buying. the most noticeable effect of humidity is going to come on the whitest books. For example, if you take a Gem Mint white pages book with a lot of whites in the cover, even if it's encapsulated, you're going to see the effects of humidity. For example, high humidity, after 6 months, you're going to start seeing yellowing. After maybe 2 years, you're going to start seeing browning, both to the cover and the interior pages, and that will continue to go downhill. So, when you really think about it, how can you combat that in a fundamental way, except for spending a lot of extra money to make the room a climate conditioned room I talked about? Well, one strategy is you can collect books that are of a very low grade or mid to low grade that are still of a high value. For example, there's 0.5 and 1.0 issues that are worth tens of thousands of dollars because they're Golden Age, early Spider-Mans, Batmans, stuff like that. Now, if you're spending that much money on comics, you're probably going to want to make the room and stuff. But there's a lot of other values on low-grade comics which are still key or pedigree issues. For example, you can get like a 3.5 Action Comics, and I'll show you some examples of these, from the 40s or 50s that have already suffered the worst effects of decolorization. The pages might already be listed as brittle or less than off-white. So there's not a lot more that's going to happen to those if they're in humidity. You can also look for comics that don't have a lot of white in the cover. For example, if you get comics with covers that have a lot of darker shades of brown and blue and black and red, you probably won't notice any additional effects of humidity at all if they're older issues at a lower grade. Now, that may sound ridiculous at first. So this guy's suggesting I go out and buy these bargain basement, super low grade comics as an investment. Well, first of all, they may not be bargain basement, like I said. Super low grade, a key issue, still may cost tens of thousands of dollars. So you can still collect comics that are of a lower grade, but if they're a key issue, then they're going to still maintain tradable selling value for a long time, and the rate of acceleration of deterioration has mostly plateaued for a lot of those. Now, sure, if you leave them in direct sunlight in 90-degree humidity for months or weeks or years, then they're going to deteriorate more. But if you're sensible about it, if they're encapsulated, if you put them in a box, then you're not going to see a lot of additional humidity. So let me give you some collection examples right now. Here's an example that would follow under the first heading of collectibles. This is a signature series. It actually happens to be a signed signature series. But you see here, this is a foil cover. And so I have it out of the sunlight, but not only is it foil, but the colors are darker. So you're not really going to see effects of humidity on this. And this comic I paid about $350 for is not going to go down in value. If anything, it'll go up. Now, here's another comic, Action Comics, from 1942. Now, it's a good grade to buy because it's a lower grade. It's still a high value comic, but still it's not the best to buy because there's quite a bit of whites in the cover. This is actually a great issue, Action Comics number 54. This was during World War II, and it's really a nice piece of history here. It should hold up fairly well, but still you may see some yellowing and browning of the whites. Now, a more sensible buy is I have a Vault of Horror, even though it's really high grade by CBS CBCS standards 9.0. You see the colors, it's a lot of darker browns and purples already. You can see some of the browning in the spine. Now that was like that when I bought it. And I've had it for over a year. So it really hasn't had any more noticeable effects of humidity because the colors are already a darker color. Now another strategy you can do would be, here's a Detective Comics, a very old comic, probably the early 40s. I have it in a frame. And it's a low-grade comic, but it still costs a lot of money. And you're not going to have a lot of further problems with humidity from this. Not only because it's already sort of been through the ringer weather-wise, but you can notice again the coloration. There's not a lot of light colors on the cover. Now here's an example of a comic that probably was not a good investment for a human environment. It's Aquaman #1. It's a super nice comic. It's fairly high in the mid-grade range. And it's still in great condition, off-white pages. Now, the thing is, this comic has a lot of whites and lighter colors. Now, I have this thing double encapsulated, which means not only is it CGC, but I have a special UV protective frame. And even so, this will be a sort of test of comics in high humidity. My suspicion is you may see some additional yellowing to it. Now technically, as long as I keep it in the case, it should always be a 7.0. But again, this would be one better left for a non-humid environment. So one final important note about this is that if you're going to use this investment strategy, you have to buy books that are already graded, encapsulated books, because then the grade is locked in. In other words, if you're buying low-grade comic books that are worth a lot of money, but they're not encapsulated, well, you still may have an even lower grade if you're keeping it in an openly humid environment. However, once they're encapsulated, they have a fair degree of protection. They've already been graded, and if you don't remove them from the cover, that grade will stand. Okay, so in summary, if you're going to have comics in a humid environment, you either need to create a room that's going to be able to troubleshoot that, or you have to invest in the right kind of books for humidity. Either the silver foil type of books and or very low grade, older books that don't have a lot of whites in the cover. That will work and you can still enjoy collecting. Ultimately, if you're going to collect as a career, you're going to want to make that room or just move to a state like Arizona or someplace, especially if you're going to start a store or do this full time. You're not going to have to worry about these sort of issues except for sunlight. So anyway, thanks for watching and stay tuned.